Above all, he says, my mind being now more opened and enlarged, I began to read the Holy Scriptures upon my knees, laying aside all other books, and praying over, if possible, every line and word. This proved meat indeed, and drink indeed, to my soul. I daily received fresh life, light, and power from above. I got more true knowledge from reading the book of God in 1 month than I could have ever acquired from all the writings of men. Once taught to understand the glorious liberty of Christ's gospel, Whitefield never turned again to asceticism, legalism, mysticism, or strange views of Christian perfection. The experience received by bitter conflict was most valuable to him. The doctrines of free grace, once thoroughly grasped, took deep root in his heart, and became, as it were, bone of his bone, and flesh of his flesh. Of all the little band of Oxford Methodists, none seemed to have got hold so soon of clear views of Christ's gospel as he did, and none kept it so unwaveringly to the end. At the early age of 22, Whitefield was admitted to holy orders by Bishop Benson of Gloucester on Trinity Sunday, 1736. His ordination was not of his own seeking. The bishop heard of his character from Lady Selwyn and others, sent for him, gave him 5 guineas to buy books, and offered to ordain him, although only 22 years old, whenever he wished. This unexpected offer came to him when he was full of scruples about his own fitness for the ministry. It cut the knot and brought him to the point of decision. I began to think, he says, that if I held out longer, I should fight against God. Whitefield's first sermon was preached in the very town where he was born, at the church of St. Mary le Crypt, Gloucester. His own description of it is the best account that can be given. Last Sunday, in the afternoon, I preached my first sermon in the church of St. Mary le Crypt, where I was baptized, and also first received the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Curiosity, as you may easily guess, drew a large congregation together upon this occasion. The sight at first a little awed me, but I was comforted with a heartfelt sense of the divine presence, and soon found the unspeakable advantage of having been accustomed to public speaking when a boy at school, and of exhorting the prisoners and poor people at their private houses while at the university. By these means I was kept from being daunted overmuch. As I proceeded, I perceived the fire kindled, till at last, though so young, and amidst a crowd of those who knew me in my childish days, I trust I was enabled to speak with some degree of gospel authority. Some few mocked, but most seemed for the present struck. And I have since heard that a complaint was made to the bishop that I drove 15 people mad the first sermon. The worthy prelate wished that the madness might not be forgotten before next Sunday. Almost immediately after his ordination, Whitefield went to Oxford and took his degree as Bachelor of Arts. He then commenced his regular ministerial life by undertaking temporal duty at the Tower Chapel, London, for 2 months. While engaged there, he preached continually in many London churches, and, among others, in the parish churches of Islington, Bishopsgate, St. Dunstan's, St. Margaret's, Westminster, and Bow, Cheapside. From the very first, he obtained a degree of popularity such as no preacher, before or since, has probably ever reached. Whether on weekdays or Sundays, wherever he preached, the churches were crowded, and an immense sensation was produced. The plain truth is that a really eloquent, extempore preacher, preaching the pure gospel, with most uncommon gifts of voice and manner, was at that time an entire novelty in London. The congregations were taken by surprise, and carried by storm. From London he removed for 2 months to Dummer, a little rural parish in Hampshire near Basingstoke. This was a totally new sphere of action, and he seemed like a man buried alive among poor, illiterate people. But he was soon reconciled to it, and thought afterwards that he reaped much profit by conversing with the poor. From Dummer he accepted an invitation, which had been much pressed on him by the Wesleys, to visit the colony of Georgia in North America, and assist in the care of an orphan house which had been set up near Savannah for the children of colonists. After preaching for a few months in Gloucestershire, and especially at Bristol and Stonehouse, he sailed for America in the latter part of 1737, and continued there about a year. The affairs of this orphan house, it may be remarked, occupied much of his attention from this period of his life till he died. Though well meant, it seems to have been the design of very questionable wisdom, and certainly entailed on Whitefield a world of anxiety and responsibility to the end of his days. Whitefield returned from Georgia at the latter part of the year 1738, partly to obtain priest's orders, which were conferred on him by his old friend Bishop Benson, and partly on business connected with the orphan house. He soon, however, discovered that his position was no longer what it was before he sailed for Georgia. The bulk of the clergy were no longer favourable to him, and regarded him with suspicion as an enthusiast and a fanatic. They were especially scandalized by his preaching the doctrine of regeneration, or the new birth, as a thing which many baptized persons greatly needed. The number of pulpits to which he had access rapidly diminished. Churchwardens, who had no eyes for drunkenness and impurity, were filled with intense indignation about what they called breaches of order. Bishops, who could tolerate Arianism, Socianism, and Deism, were filled with indignation at a man who declared fully the atonement of Christ and the work of the Holy Ghost, and began to denounce him openly. In short, from this period of his life, Whitefield's field of usefulness within the Church of England narrowed rapidly on every side. The step which at this juncture gave a turn to the whole current of Whitefield's ministry was his adoption of the system of open-air preaching. Seeing that thousands everywhere would attend no place of worship, spent their Sundays in idleness or sin, and were not to be reached by sermons within walls, he resolved, in the spirit of holy aggression, to go out after them into the highways and hedges, on his master's principle, and compel them to come in. His first attempt to do this was among the colliers at Kingswood near Bristol in February 1739. After much prayer, he one day went to Hanham Mount, and standing upon a hill, began to preach to about 100 colliers upon Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 3.